On today's show, we are going to break down the top 16 of our March mock draft here at Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. I'm Sebastian High, and on today's show, we are going to dig into our March mock draft here at Locked On NHL Prospects. This is just going to be the top 16. We're going to have a part 2 that will be posted tomorrow, and there is a lot to dig into here. We did a little tankathon draft simulator, and there were two teams that won the lottery and jumped quite a few spots up in the draft: the Calgary Flames and the Montreal Canadiens. But before we jump into that, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 if your bet wins. Visit fanduel.com/lockedon to get started. So let us jump straight into it. And at first overall, the Calgary Flames jump all the way from 11th seed to the first overall draft slot and quite giddily make their way up to the podium. This is not a draft class where there's going to be too much question of who's going first overall, a little bit like last year in 2023 with Connor Bedard. And Macklin Celebrini is the name that is most likely going to be called up at first overall. And the Calgary Flames are quite elated with this prospect to add a player of his caliber to their pool. After selecting Samuel Honzek in the teens in last draft, they're able to add a true number one center long term to complement their lineup. And this is a player that they're going to be able to build around. Celebrini is 6 feet, 190-pound centerman, playing with Boston University, putting up absolutely ridiculous numbers. He is lighting up the NCAA as a freshman and is quite likely going to be an impactful NHLer as soon as this fall. This is a player who excels in all three zones, especially in transition and in the offensive zone with a puck on a stick. Really dynamic, very quick player. Very intelligent, constantly getting to the highest danger areas in the offensive zone. And he's a very easy player to select at first overall for a variety of reasons. There are very few question marks in his game. He's quite refined. He's very young for this draft class. He's only turning 17, only turning 18 in the summertime. And the trajectory with him, it just continues to mount higher and higher and higher. Had a just dominant D-1 season with the Chicago Steel and has one-upped himself as a freshman in the NCAA as the youngest player playing in college hockey. And he's also been the best player playing in college hockey this year. So the decision for Calgary should not be overly difficult, and winning the draft lottery is quite a gift, especially in this particular draft class. Now, at second overall, this is where things open up a little bit. The Montreal Canadiens jump like 5 or 6 slots to number 2 and have a lot of options here. With the Montreal Canadiens' current lineup, they need a truly dynamic offensive force to really put them over the edge and complete their top 6 moving forward. They have a lot of prospects that are going to fill in their bottom 6 really nicely in the next couple of years, but that top 6 could still use that one superstar element. And my guess here is that they go with Cayden Lindstrom. Lindstrom is a 6'4", 216-pound centerman playing for Medicine Hat in the WHL, and he is everything you could possibly want in a 6'4" centerman at second overall. He is physically dominant, really intelligent. He's a triple threat in the offensive zone, a strong goal scorer, a really capable and creative playmaker, constantly creating room for his line mates. He's defensively responsible and engaged. There's definitely still room to grow on that front, but he has all the tools and the habits to be a solid two-way force at the NHL level in a couple of years' time. And he could also be a player that is playing NHL minutes as soon as in the fall, while likely not in as big a role as Celebrini will have in Calgary, still likely going to be playing some pretty solid hockey. So I think Lindstrom would complement the Montreal Canadiens really nicely in terms of what they value as well as what they need. And he would be a really solid piece to add into that fray to complement players like Nick Suzuki, Cole Caulfield, Yuri Slafkovsky, and Kirby Dach. There's a lot of interesting pieces there in Montreal, and Cayden Lindstrom would certainly elevate that to the next level. At third overall, we have the San Jose Sharks, who, while disappointed to be missing out on Celebrini, and of course there's all the Celebrini connections with the San Jose Sharks. I mean, with the Mike Greer, Boston University connection, it's all there, but it's not to be in this particular draft sim. That said, there are still many players available to them, and my guess is that they choose to bolster the right side of their defensive core. Right shot defensemen are always at a premium in the NHL, and one of the right shot defensemen available in this draft class has both a very high ceiling and a high floor in Artyom Levshunov. He's a 6'2", 209-pound right D playing for Michigan State in the NCAA, and he's been showing flashes of a whole lot of interesting things this season. He is the decision making has been a little bit of a work in progress with him, but there have been flashes of really impressive work under heavy pressure. Very solid puck mover, quite physical, constantly getting involved in the offensive zone, often acting as a fourth forward in those scenarios, liking to activate along boards, circling around the net, jumping up into the middle and high slot as a shooting threat. He has a lot of really interesting tools. He's a solid puck handler, very solid shooter of the puck, quite selective with how he's using his shots, which has been a big shift from last season. The learning curve there has been quite promising, and the playmaking has been very interesting. There's quite a dynamic element to his playmaking game, and he's very creative. He's not without mistakes, to be certain, but that testing has also been allowing him to grow his game over the course of this season. And San Jose would really be intrigued by this profile, and he would complement their lineup and their prospect pool very nicely. They now have a lot of soft skill in their forward core, but lack perhaps some of that grit on the defensive side of things. Next up, the Chicago Blackhawks, after landing Connor Bedard last year, get to double down on elite skill with Ivan Demidov here at fourth overall. Demidov is perhaps the most fun player in this entire draft class, extraordinarily dynamic. By our level of grading tools, he is a 10 grade puck handler, which is not a grade that we've given to any other prospect for any other tool so far this season. It is absurdly strong for Demidov, and he would add an element of just added creativity to work alongside Connor Bedard at the same level in terms of processing speed and creativity in the offensive zone. And while there are certainly still some question marks of how his style is going to translate, he can still play some type of pond hockey at times. He is just he's electric. He's electric on every shift. A tremendous playmaker, underrated goal scorer, but overall just a true play creator in the offensive zone and in transition with an added element of a pretty high motor to boot. So I think he would complement the Chicago Blackhawks very nicely with that toolkit. And finishing off the first segment here at fifth overall, the Anaheim Ducks have a ton of options because their prospect pool is loaded. A lot of their young players have already made the jump to the NHL. Players like Mintyukov and Carlson and McTavish, and the list goes on and on for quite a long time there. But I think that they are going to take this opportunity to just take a really hard swing on upside. So while they have had a tendency to draft the quite physical, menacing, painful players to play against on the forward side of things in recent draft classes. I think they're going to just take the massive swing on upside with who is left on the board, and that would be Berkeley Catton. Catton is electrifying, really dynamic, very creative with the puck on a stick, high-end puck handler and playmaker and goal scorer. All the puck skills are way above average with Catton, and while there's certainly still some question marks around how he's going to translate stylistically to the NHL, Anaheim does tremendous work with prospects on that front in terms of tweaking their game to make it translate as efficiently and fluidly as possible to that next level. And Berkeley Catton is at best a dynamic first line winger, and I think he would complement what Anaheim has building in that organization at the moment just beautifully. And yeah, that wraps things up for this first segment, and we'll jump right into sixth overall with the Columbus Blue Jackets right after these messages from our sponsors over at Robinhood. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute, and when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on that 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started with robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of the first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% match on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker-dealer. All right, so jumping right back in at sixth overall, the Columbus Blue Jackets may have been hoping for a higher draft slot here than number 6, and I think that the new management in Columbus will take that opportunity to swing on a player that they believe in and that they see a ton of upside in and a really promising trajectory. So I had them picking Tij Iginla at sixth overall, which may seem like a little bit of a reach in terms of current consensus rankings, but he's been steadily climbing those rankings over the course of the season, and his goal scoring prowess, off puck movement, overall skill, and growing dynamic ability is just very, very exciting. And I think that Columbus sees that and would love to add that to the fold with all the other playmakers that they have in their system. Players like Kent Johnson and Adam Fantilli are really capable creators, and we've been seeing what Iginla has been able to do alongside a dynamic playmaker in Andrew Crystal there in Kelowna. He's a 6-foot, 185-pound left winger, and I think that he'd be a very interesting fit in Columbus. Next up, the Arizona Coyotes. I think that they're going to continue their trend of just taking really big Russians because Anton Salayev is still here available at 7th overall, which may not quite be expected or likely, but is what's happening in this specific scenario. And I think they are going to sprint to the podium to draft him. Salayev is a 6'7", 207-pound left shot defenseman playing KHL minutes with Torpedo Nizhny Novgorod. And while he is quite raw in his decision making and in his consistency, as well as in his on puck habits, there is an element there that just we don't see very often. He combines an elite level of reach, mobility, and aggression. He can close his gaps quicker than any other player in this draft class by a large margin. And while his on-puck game remains quite chaotic and there's a deer in the headlights element when he's pressured, there is definitely room to grow with the way that he moves around the ice, the flashes of handling ability, and and of distribution skill in the offensive zone. He's never going to be a massive playmaker offensively, but think of him more of like that two-way element, but specifically just shut down defender that I think Arizona would absolutely love to add to their core to complement Dmitry Simashev. Having those two players to anchor two defensive pairings would offer them a ton of flexibility in the upcoming decades. At 8th overall, the Ottawa Senators, I think, are going to stop the slip for Cole Eiserman. He is a rather divisive player in terms of the upside versus the floor and what the likelihood is of where he ends up in that range. At best, he could be one of the better goal scorers in the NHL. His ability to rifle the puck from any place in the offensive zone, whether he's off balance or shooting from his back foot, it doesn't matter. You can rifle pucks into the top corner from basically anywhere. And that's a quality that is at a premium in the NHL. But that said, while he is quite capable in terms of moving off puck to get open in the offensive zone, and his ability to drive the net in flashes has also been quite impressive, everything beyond those couple elements leaves a lot of question marks in his game in terms of his off-puck engagement, defensive engagement, his habits in transition, supporting the rush, being an actual contributor in transition is all very much still in flux and a work in progress for Eiserman. And there's definitely a possibility that he peaks as a bottom six goal scorer, maybe have a second power play presence, but is unable of making the jump into that top six, playing at that higher pace of play. So the Ottawa Senators are going to take a risk in taking him at 8th overall, but they could possibly reap massive benefits from this selection. At 9th overall, the Buffalo Sabres have a lot of left shot defensemen now, having gone out and acquired Bowen Byram at the deadline, and they clearly have a ton of value in puck moving, intelligent, dynamic, and adaptable defensemen. And I see them taking the big swing on Zane Parekh here at 9th overall, perhaps a little bit higher than most people are going to expect him to go come draft day, despite him being valued very highly among public scouts. He's a 6 foot, 181-pound right shot defenseman playing in Saginaw in the OHL, and his his ability to create plays in the offensive zone, to really be a fourth forward in the offensive zone very consistently and very effectively, has been very impressive this season. He has the most goals and points in the OHL among draft eligibles. He's a defenseman. That's pretty good. And he's been playing in a very modern, fluid system in Saginaw with a ton of movement along the blue line, switching roles with forwards, and constantly working in cyclical motions in the offensive zone, which would also complement what Buffalo is kind of starting to build. So I think from a stylistic point of view, as well as organizational needs and upside, Zane Parekh makes a ton of sense with the Buffalo Sabres. Last for this segment, we have the New Jersey Devils, picking likely a lot higher than they'd wished to this season, but they're going to nab another OHL defenseman who, in their eyes, slipped down to them at 10th overall with Sam Dickinson. He's 6'3", 194-pound left shot defenseman playing in London in the OHL, and what he brings to the table is a lot of versatility. There's an element of offensive intelligence and creativity that he's really been fostering over the course of this season that I've been a very big fan of. And he also brings a physical element to the table. He's very effective in the defensive zone, in my viewing so far this season. And he would continue to kind of build in a perhaps stylistically similar sense to Simon Nemec, with, I would say, less intelligence and more raw tools, and would really complement what New Jersey has building there. He'd be a really interesting player to add into that fold, and I see a decent amount of upside with Dickinson as well, and combining with Luke Hughes, there would be a lot less pressure of needing to be the first pairing presence, and I think that could really foster his development quite positively in the upcoming years. And that wraps things up for the second segment, and we'll jump right back in at 11th overall with the San Jose Sharks right after these messages from our sponsors over at FanDuel. Say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tourney. Whether you're betting on a big upset or on a one seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your $5 bet wins. That's $200 that you can use on anything from point spreads, money lines, same game parlays, and far more. You can even bet on who you think is going to win it all. I know I personally am always a really big fan of same game parlays, especially when I'm attending an event live, as it adds just a little bit more excitement to the whole experience. Just visit fanduel.com/locked on and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. Alrighty, let's wrap things up here for the top 16. Starting off at number 11 with the San Jose Sharks. They get this pick via the Pittsburgh Penguins from that Erik Karlsson trade, and after picking Artem Levshunov at third overall, they're going for a forward here, and they pick one who very likely could go a lot higher than 11th overall come draft day in Konsta Helenius, who's been playing at a very high level in Liga this season, been playing at just under a point a game level, playing top six center minutes. He's over 50% in his faceoffs and has overall he's been the model of consistency this season. He's highly intelligent, likely going to be an NHLer within a year or two's time because of that intelligence. So San Jose is getting a player relatively soon. He also complements the prospect pool there in San Jose very nicely. While there's a lot of raw skill, super raw upside in players like Quentin Musty and Will Smith, Konsta Helenius likely tops out as an excellent second line center. And I think that San Jose could use just that, a real stabilizing force on that line, playing with consistent intelligence, really useful both on the power play and the penalty kill. Very possession oriented, makes a small plays to retain that possession and doesn't get overzealous and trying to do too much. While there is a chance that he ends up as just a third line center and the upside's a bit more limited than other players left on the board here, I think he would be a bit too enticing for San Jose to pass on here at 11th overall. Next up, the Seattle Kraken. Very interesting team. They've been drafting in a fascinating way in the last couple years, which makes it perhaps interesting to predict here. And I have them going with a really intelligent and consistent and projectable two-way winger. So I have them going with Michael Brensek Nygaard. He's a 6'1", 198-pound right winger playing with Mora IK and Hockey Allsvenskan, which is Sweden's second tier of professional hockey. And comparing him, for instance, to Dalibor Dvorsky, who was playing in that league last season, MBN has been able to put up really consistent minutes in that middle six for Mora all season long, and the production has really started to flow in recent months. But he gives you a ton of projectable defensive effort, very very engaged off puck and in the defensive zone, consistently well positioned defensively, really has a significant upside as a defensive piece on a second line, for instance, definite PK upside, and in the offensive zone he has quite a lethal release. He's a threat to score from medium range, and I think that versatility in his toolkit and in the way that he can approach the game and adapt his style to different situations, like we saw him be a lot more offensive leaning at the World Juniors than he has been in professional hockey, for instance. I think that would really, really be enticing to the Seattle Kraken. Next up, the St. Louis Blues. They definitely have a mold of player that they quite like to draft, and I don't see them changing that one bit here, going with Liam Greentree. Liam Greentree is a 6'2", 194-pound right winger playing with the Windsor Spitfires, captaining the Windsor Spitfires in the OHL this season, and he brings a lot to the table that I think St. Louis is going to adore. He plays a very gritty style. He likes to get physically involved, very middle driven, constantly trying to use his teammates to create openings and exploit defensive structures. He's not the greatest skater, but he's highly intelligent, and I think that would really entice St. Louis to go this route on draft day. And there's also significant upside with Greentree in my eyes as a complementary piece on a top line. So while he wouldn't be a superstar to add into the fold, he'd be yet another player with a very high floor. Like, he's going to be a middle six piece almost certainly, but there's also significant upside there with Liam Greentree. So next up we have the Minnesota Wild, and they are very interesting in how they draft. Last year, I did not at all expect them to go with a player like Charlie Stramel with their first selection of the draft, and that hasn't necessarily been aging particularly well, with Stramel very much struggling with Wisconsin this season. He's been like 15th in points on that team, and I see them going with a defenseman this time around. And Carter Yakimchuk is a player that I think that they'd quite be interested in. The upside with Yakimchuk in the offensive zone is really interesting. He has a wicked shot. He's a plus level skater and puck handler. He has a really impressive reach. He uses his physicality to protect possession. And in the defensive zone, there has been some work this season. He's really progressed. Early season viewings were very painful in the defensive zone, routinely found out of position, keeping a very loose gap, being overly aggressive at times. And he's become a lot more consistent as the season's worn on. And I think Minnesota would really like that trajectory mixed with the upside in this player, especially offensively. And picking him here at 14th overall would be really interesting. Next, we have the Detroit Red Wings, who have an opportunity here to make a very fun selection, selecting a brother of a player that they already have in their prospect pool and who's actually playing with said brother at the University of Denver this season. Zeev Buium, who is Shai Buium's brother, is a really interesting two-way defenseman. And a lot of his game is based off of how escapable he is. He is just he wiggles out of pressure with ease. He's a strong puck handler with strong offensive instincts. His upside in transition is really, really interesting to me. And Detroit always values those relatively fluid skating transition beast defenseman. And while left shot defense is not exactly a position of weakness in Detroit's pool, with other players like Simon Edvinsson, William Wallinder, and Albert Johansson and more coming through the ranks there, Shai Buium too, obviously. I think that the upside here with Zeev Buium would be just a little bit too interesting for them to pass on. And Steve Eiserman's never been afraid to pick the player that he likes at the slot he's at. And I think Zeev Buium would check a lot of boxes of what Detroit values and likes, also in terms of overall upside. And finishing off the episode here, we're going to have the part 2 tomorrow, but we're going to finish off here with a really interesting one. The Washington Capitals are selecting here at 16th, and I put out a little Twitter post before recording this episode, seeing what other people find interesting in terms of matches between prospects and teams, in terms of what the teams are interested in, what they need. Just wanted to get some, like, the community involved here in this process of the mock draft. And one very interesting comment that I saw had the Washington Capitals going with Yegor Surin at 16th here. And I like this. Surin is a fascinating player. He's been rather inconsistent in how he's been approaching the game on the mental side of things in my viewings this season. There have been games where he's been like 2 or 3 beats behind at the MHL level that I've seen. But the raw tools, whether it be the physical tools, the mobility, the playmaking, the puck skills, all rate as slightly above average to well above average. And while he is still quite raw in how he approaches the game, and he will need like 2 to 3 to 4 years before he has a chance of making the NHL. And I know I personally don't have him in my top 32 just yet. Washington is never afraid of taking big swings on high upside and skillful Russians. And with how Ivan Miroshnichenko, for instance, has already been playing some pretty solid minutes with the Washington Capitals this season, I think that Yegor Surin makes some sense for them. And Surin likely will be a right winger at the NHL level. He's 6'1", 192 pounds, and will, as said, need time to marinate before cracking an NHL lineup. I think he'd make a lot of sense here for the Washington Capitals and really fit in with what they've been valuing on draft day in recent years. And yeah, that wraps things up for this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in to this solo episode. So I hope that my monologue has not been overly boring to listen to. My co-host Hattie Kalakash's day-to-day with the flu. So unfortunately, he's not going to be joining me in tomorrow's episode either. But we're going to wrap up this mock draft with the top 32 in tomorrow's episode, which is obviously a lot more difficult in terms of the ranking of the teams because of the playoffs still being in the future at this point. It's going to be a fun little exercise nonetheless. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. We are super close to the 1,000 subscriber milestone, so be very appreciated if you could help us give a little boost to get there, and leave us a comment letting us know what your thoughts are on this mock draft. Was there a player that you just really don't want the team to pick at a certain slot? Are there other fits that you like a lot? Let us know in the comments below. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, go and check out Locked On Sports Today for all of the updates that you could possibly need on what's going on in the sporting world. And tune back in tomorrow to check out part 2 of this mock draft, and have a lovely end to your day.